Okay, so we're talking about, what exactly is the divine feminine? How do we put words and concepts around something that in, intuitively or instinctively is appealing and exciting and yet maybe even overwhelming? Um, so I want to name a few features of the how. What is the divine feminine? And I want to maybe bring some surprising perspectives that you hadn't thought of before. Um, so I guess the first one I really want to speak to is this notion that feminine is fundamentally an electrical function, meaning receptive. It's a receptive current. So if you plug in your hair dryer, the plug is masculine and the outlet is feminine, meaning it's receptive. And so if you could think of our minds or our awareness as either activating or receptive, and that we go back and forth between these two qualities. But in our Western culture, our minds tend to be very overactive. Think about how busy our minds are. We're making plans, we're thinking about what that text was that our boyfriend sent that wasn't quite as friendly as we wanted it to be. We're thinking about weekend plans, we're recalling a relationship from the past. We're trying to be strategic about our business goals. All of these things create a kind of fire over our heads, like I think in the Eastern traditions, they call it a vortex or an electrical fire. And what this does effectively is repel the higher energies, the higher dimensional streams of grace and miracles and opportunities that might gently be wanting to reach out and touch our awareness or get our attention. And so being receptive is one of the most fundamental treasures of a contemplative or a meditative practice, because as all the traditions advocate mindfulness, Buddhism, Christianity, um, Judaism, in some of the mystical, like Kabbalistic arenas, they all advocate for a quieting of the mind. So this feminine awareness is about being receptive to the streams of the divine that want to reach us and inspire the ways we live and think and conduct ourselves. So ask yourself, I know that I am such a mental person and I tend to be very active and too intellectual for my own good sometimes. And so I'm just sharing from my own clumsy experiences that I have had these exquisite connections and relationships with higher dimensions that have inspired and nurtured me. And then, like an ungrateful guest at a banquet, I'll just jump up and blow it off for a week or a month, and get engrossed in the details of my own day-to-day culture that are not nearly as nourishing ultimately. And then I have to remember, oh, where was I when I had those great experiences, and how did I set myself up to be receptive to the divine flow or not. So the most fundamental aspect of the divine feminine is the willingness to be quiet, to be humble, to receive, and to achieve in a way that may not draw the accolades of the outer world, but is a really needed gift at this time in our culture, because all of these higher streams are seeking allies, at least in my understanding. Okay, so a second aspect that's closely related to a contemplative practice that's so related to the divine feminine is just the notion that we might purify and attune our aura. I think by now there's a lot of literature out that there is such a thing as a human aura. And I think in modern language, we would call it your energy. Like, what kind of energy are you putting out? And do you have someone in your workplace where every time you walk by their office, you think, oh, I'm going to hurry faster to move by because their energy is so negative? Um, so, how do we purify and attune the aura? This is a feminine practice of simply going within, focusing our awareness and making ourselves pure, and in a sense being allies in advocating the taking out. It's like cleaning out your closets. You want to clear elements out of your psyche, your memory, and your attitude bank that are undivine. So that's like a huge part of the divine feminine. Another aspect that I want to call your attention to that is innately feminine is the impulse to heal what has been pulled apart, to heal the broken parts of us and our relationships and our world. We are so disconnected as a culture from the earth herself and the rhythms of nature that many women even regard their menstrual cycles as kind of an option that they could medicate out of. And we forget that these rhythms are nourishing to our systems and put us in sync with the pulse of life itself. And so it's a gentle invitation to call us back to reconnect with the real pace of life, the love of life at its own pace, not at the clock, not at the gun of some sort of stopwatch or the race of the markets. And in the ancient cultures in Egypt, this practice of tending the healing of what has been pulled apart was called the cult of Isis, and it came from this ancient myth where her consort, or her lover slash brother, was cut into a million pieces by his enemy, and she went around the world and gathered up these pieces of her broken love and lovingly brought them back together. And in my experience, that's what love does, right? It makes us feel more whole. So in mysterious and sometimes obvious ways, we're learning to love in new directions that bring us together as a world. So for me, that's a huge facet of the divine feminine. I couldn't really complete any kind of thought about this notion of the divine feminine without really touching upon the gentler, more holistic processes of our whole lifestyle that are nourishing and less harsh, less categorical, or dogmatic than in times past. And just for a couple of examples, I'll talk about the trends in natural childbirth, the trends in organic gardening, the trends in organic grocery purchasing, fair trade, artisanship, education initiatives that are holistic, such as Montessori and Waldorf, and the trends in business to consider collaboration over competition, and to end this notion that we live in a dog-eat-dog world. It doesn't really have to be like that. So what if our healing practices were gentler and more natural and involved fewer chemical additives? That would be just less we have to clear from our systems, and more in a way that they could restore themselves. So yeah, when I speak to these things, I also want to just bring awareness to this kind of consideration or treatment of relationships in which the feminine and the masculine are seeking to relate in new ways. And of course, we all know that many traditional roles have been broken apart, and we're reconsidering what we want to keep there and what we want to renegotiate. But in terms of the divine feminine, I'm an advocate for women taking the lead in regarding themselves as the curators and custodians of the dignity and integrity of their homes, inner and outer. Our inner attitudes, our inner struggles and healing is the temple for our life and light, and our outer homes are really expressions of how we live, and our attitudes and practices in cultivating the lives that we interconnect with is one of the most fundamental features of the divine feminine that is just so obvious, that it's kind of like speaking about oxygen or water or something. But in these times when even the most fundamental trust issues are being treated cavalierly, I think it behooves us to really hold these in the light box and say, where am I with this? So I hope that I've given you some inspiration to consider how these trends of the divine feminine are operating in your life, where your curiosity is and where your challenges lie. So thank you for hearing me, and I hope that something I've said today has uplifted you and given you nourishment for your path